Right. Well, so the couple things there I want to pull out. One is this idea that you spent a lot of time optimizing and going down rabbit holes. And as you were saying it, I'm like, that is the total opposite of how, like me, right? Like, which is why your product, that is the podcast that helps, solve that problem, works. Because I'm not the person who wants to spend hours trying to save like $100. Like if it's quick, I'll do it, or I'll outsource it. Or it will just take me a long time to build up the energy to make the calls. And like right now, I know I should call, like I need to go negotiate my insurance, but I'm just like, I don't have the time. So with that, as you're now thinking, or you thought about leaving your job, I know you said, you had some encouragement. I'm sure you had spreadsheets and a backup plan and numbers, right? Like, but what did you do financially to prepare for that? Like, because I know there are a lot of people who have ideas. They may have something on the side. It's not making as much money, but how did you know that you were going to make enough doing this full time, to walk away from that stability?
Yeah. So in my case, it was I just ramped up the business to the point that it was making enough that it was matching my salary. So like that, I, I think a better approach would have been save up enough to buy myself a runway, and we'd had the savings, but just allocating it like mentally saying, let's put
Yeah.
6 months of my after tax income into a high yield savings account, which fortunately right now is super easy because rates are really high, and put that money aside and say, for 6 months, I've got myself covered. Um, and if something doesn't work, I'll just find another job. Like I could have bought myself 6 months or a year or something. Instead, I took the time to wait and say, well, now this is making as much as my salary. But on one hand, that's a straightforward, easy solution. On the other hand, well, now I had two salaries. And so, yes, this was making the same as my salary, but it was also going to cut right now. 100% of the podcast income at that point in time was just savings because I had a salary. It was about to go to a point where I would have no savings. So even for me, I was like, well, now that I have enough income from my side hustle, now I'm throwing away all the savings. Do I really want to quit? Maybe I should give it 6 more months. Maybe I should just put another little more in the bank. And you can always just continue to ask yourself that question. So at some point you have to say, this is not a long-term decision, right? If I need to get another job, I can. So it's a short-term thing. And the advice I would give both others and my previous self is, if you can set aside enough money that you can get by without your salary, know that it's short-term. Like, you're not talking about, if you make $100,000 a year, you're not talking about not having $100,000 a year for the next 40 years. You might be talking about not having it for 6 months. And if you make $100,000 for 6 months, that's 50,000. But you pay taxes on that, and so like the net cost to you might be 30,000. So like all of a sudden you took this thing that feels like losing your income for the rest of your life, and you boil it down to a $30,000 problem. And by the way, if you make 50,000 instead of 100, now it's a $15,000 problem. And $15,000 is a big number, but it's much more manageable to say, can I save 6 months of operating expenses? And by the way, in those 6 months, you can cut back on a lot of things. You can say, well, we don't need it to be my normal 6 months of operating expenses, because maybe if it doesn't work out, we'll eat out a little less, or we won't buy, we won't order sushi once a week, or whatever it is, your vice. And so now we won't take that one extra vacation. Maybe you've cut it down to $7,000. And so now you're like, oh, wow, the cost to try this out for 6 months just went down 3 orders of magnitude in my head. And it feels much more approachable. I wish I'd had that conversation with myself like
Right.
18 months ago. But I don't know if I'm as risk tolerant as I might seem.
When it comes to your finances, your personal finances, so you did the traditional thing, went to school, got the job, career, then you start to build businesses. How are you with your finances? I mean, I'm assuming if you're optimizing for everything else, you were very good at optimizing and controlling your finances. So talk a little bit about your personal finance journey.
I had this belief. So investment banking is not a fun career. I mean, some people might love it, but for me, I did not. And so my first few jobs, I was not what I would call fulfilled, which basically gave me this financial independence attitude before I knew that was a thing. I'd never heard of the FIRE movement at the time, but my attitude was, this job is not fun. If I have to do this for the rest of my life, I'll be miserable. So I need to save as much money as possible so that I have the freedom to not do this job. But like I like traveling. I like having nice food. So I didn't want to just, move to the middle of nowhere, eat beans and rice. So it was kind of like a little bit aggressive savings, but with a little bit of hacking the system to try to say, well, I want to take a vacation, so I'll do travel hacks. I want to, live in a nice place, so I'll do house hacks. Like finding all of the ways to get that experience without having to spend the amount. But I was aggressively savings. And I think my attitude was always every dollar I made was savings. So any dollar I spent was borrowing from my savings. And I'm not saying that's a healthy mindset. I think some people's mindset is I save $300 a month, and if there's anything left, I can just spend it. It's like the 29th of the month and they're like, well,
Yep.
my checking account still has an extra $500, so I might as well spend it. For me, I was like, do I want to dip into my savings to go out to dinner tonight? Do I want to dip into, like, that savings could be worth, 30 times more if I wait till I'm 65. Like, do I really want to spend, if you do that math, it's kind of crazy, right? You're like, do I want to buy a
Yeah.
$500 couch? Well, that $500 could be $5,000 if I wait till I retire. So it's really a $5,000 couch. So maybe we'll stick with that IKEA thing from college. Like, I don't think that's necessarily healthy, but that was the approach I took because I so much didn't want to have to do a job I hated for the rest of my life. And as far as what I did with money, it was like, okay, let's take all of our money and put it in index funds. Like, I was not trying
Hmm.
to beat the market. I was not trying to do anything fancy. I was like, let's put all the money we save into index funds, max out any matching, max out 401ks, all that kind of stuff, and then not think about it. So I have a very unsexy investment portfolio. It's like a
Well,
couple individual stocks, some that because I worked at a company, and the vast majority is just index funds and focus on other aspects of my life to try to make more money.
yeah, I mean, that's basically how we are too. I mean, I think the simple path to wealth, as JL Collins said, who's also been on the podcast, is just, you don't have to beat the market or do more. That actually is just a waste of energy in terms of like the return you get. So I love the idea of thinking about it as 100% savings. I think that's, like you said, it's not necessarily it's not necessarily healthy if you then have issues like then spending and enjoying your money, which is like part of the reason we have money after we reach security and we get like some stability with our finances. But I do like this idea of, especially for me, so I talk about this in my book, Your Journey to Financial Freedom. There are stages within the financial independence journey. And the first, the starter stages or the starter levels that you have to go through require a bit more effort and sacrifice, and not necessarily in a bad way, but in order to get you through to like a more stable and enjoyable path. And all parts of the journey can be enjoyable, but I like this idea of when you are in the earlier stages to look at it as, hey, I may be, spending like this, which then makes me not have this money in the future or allows me to stay into debt longer because I could have paid off that thing. The other thing I'd say is that you think, for most people like yourself, like, are you still that way now? Like with your money, have you loosened up? Because that's what I don't like about, like, when I hear the term optimizing, which I also use, I'm very careful to understand that some things can't be optimized, like the emotions and the relationships you have. And even though going out to dinner for X amount, you want to be careful, but it's like the community and just the feeling you get when you're around others, right? Like that is something that always can be optimized. So, are you different now or have you changed? And then let's talk about, is there optimizing too much?
There's definitely optimizing too much. I've definitely changed. Um, I sometimes kind of bite my tongue and say, no, I shouldn't waste my time and energy here. It's like let's focus on optimizing the bigger problems in life, not the smaller things. So I think I've moved up that ladder, but I still get caught up. My wife and I still have the same problem. It's like we're going to the grocery store, and it's like I know it doesn't matter that strawberries are like seem like they're twice as expensive this week than last week, but like it still irks me. Maybe we'll get blueberries instead. Like we shouldn't be optimizing for $3 problems, but we still are. Um, but when it comes to relationships, it's funny. My version of optimizing is I know that's important. And so when we're going out to dinner with friends, when we're going to dinner with like that's a meal that we just don't try to save money on because we know relationships are important and we've thought about it because we've taken the time to say where in our lives do we want to optimize for certain things. We think relationships are important. So we're going to spend time and energy and money on travel to see friends or family and to do things. That's important to us. That doesn't mean there's no way to optimize it, right? There's this app that recently I don't want to get people too excited because the deal's gone, but there was this app called InKind where you could effectively stack a bunch of savings offers between Chase deals and their promo. And I spent $100 and I now have like $350 of dining credit. Right. So it's like, I still want to go out to a nice restaurant and I'm not going to think about the bill, but 250 of the dollars I spent at this restaurant were covered by some combo of a company's promotion and Chase's promotion. So I'm still trying to find the deals so that I can get stuff for better, but I'm not doing it at the expense of not going to a restaurant. I'm not doing it at the expense of not going on a trip. So I prioritize the things I want, find ways, if possible, to get a better deal on them. And if not, pay full freight because I decided they're important.
Right. And then lucky for you, you also found a way to create a business that shares more of the process behind it. So that obviously that's very helpful. Like I have a friend, I laugh at her, but she actually I guess enjoys this. She would drive to different grocery stores depending on like what they're offering. I still don't think she's optimizing well because I'm just like, you have to pay for the gas though. You're not accounting for that. So even though you saved money by not buying the strawberries there, you just drove down, but I think like with her and you, there's a joy. She gets joy out of, which is also something you can optimize. So for me, pointless. I'll pay the extra $2 for a convenience for me not having to drive anywhere else. But there is something that she gets, like that satisfaction from game. She thinks she's winning or the gaming the system. And for her, it works. So